All right, week 9 in the NFL, less than 30 hours from kicking off in Pittsburgh. And I know we're going live earlier than usual this week ahead of a trip to Vegas that I have teed up. So, for those of you watching along, it is just me instead of the usual two box. Pro Better Fabian Summert was scheduled to join this show, but he is currently with his wife at the hospital after she gave birth to their son earlier today. So, as I told Fabian, that's an excused absence, of course. If there ever was one, happy to hear from Fabian that mom and son are doing well, and congratulations to the Summer family on its latest edition. So, today it's going to be a rare solo episode. Let's get to it. First off, as usual, for those of you live with us on YouTube or Twitter, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to weigh in and I'll look to work those into the show when possible, to the extent that I can, while multitasking a bit over the course of a solo episode. Dan, I see you're already with us once again, so thank you. Appreciate you tuning in as always. And let's dive right into it and hit the ground running, talking a side that I'm eyeing in week 9. Was fortunate to get off the schneid last week with Carolina, not only covering but winning that one outright against Houston. And I'm going to paraphrase Lou Brown from Major League Two, looking at sides this week. It was a classic line in Major League Two. We won a game last week. If we win this week, it's called two in a row. And if we win again next week, that's called a winning streak. It has happened before. So, in an effort to make that happen again for the purposes of this show, I'm going to go to a side once again that might be just as ugly as the Panthers pick felt last week. And that would be the New York Jets, catching 3 points, hosting my beloved Chargers. I know the Jets have some offensive line concerns, and the Chargers are off a rare no sweat win and cover on primetime last Sunday night against Chicago. But I think when I start with this one, I'm tempted to look at the look ahead line, and I always take look aheads with a grain of salt. I know that market lacks liquidity. However, over time, it does seem to be becoming a more efficient market. And the look ahead in this one was Chargers minus 1.5. To see it now all the way up to that key number of 3 indicates to me that we're giving the Chargers too much credit, or at least the market is giving the Chargers too much credit for handling Tyson Bagent and a porous Bears defense. For the Chargers, last week continued an alarming pattern of second half scoring output. If we go back their last 4 games, a goose egg hosting the Raiders, 10 points in the second half against Dallas on Monday night a few weeks ago, but you may remember 7 of those points came on a short field off a muffed punt. Then the Chargers got shut out in the second half at Kansas City, and they only mustered 6 points in the second half last Sunday against Chicago. Add it all up, you've got 16 points in 8 quarters over their last 4 second halves. And I think it makes sense to isolate second halves here because a contributing factor to this pattern is that the Chargers still can't run the ball all that efficiently. And that showed once again during their struggles to build on a second half lead against Chicago. We saw something similar against the Raiders not too long back. And Daniel Popper, the Chargers beat writer for The Athletic, wrote a great piece recently about the fact that the Chargers run game was expected to improve under new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. And instead, somehow it seems like it's managed to regress. I know the Jets defense isn't as good as it was last year, but I think it's a step up in class compared to what the Chargers faced against the Bears last week. And that Bears defense kept the Chargers ground game in check. So when I look at this matchup, it's tough for me to see a one-dimensional Chargers offense building a big recipe, big enough to cover a 3-point spread for a comfortable win on the road against a defense that still is good for the Jets. And one thing I see in the Jets' favor here is that they're in the final stages of a stretch that's offered them the luxury of just one true road game since week 3. Over that stretch, the Jets will have had 4 home games, their bye week, and last week they were the de facto road team playing in their own home stadium against the Giants. Add in that this is a Monday night game, so the Jets get an extra day of rest with no travel. I think they're going to be about as fresh as we'll see an NFL team look in week 9. All things considered, as far as sides go this week, my favorite look on the week 9 board right now, the Jets +3, consensus price a flat -110, and I would consider it good with a touch of wiggle room up to -115. Now, if we want to look at teasers this week, we've got a bunch of options again to go through that classic model of 3 and 7, laying up to -120, which again, we can't find that in Nevada anymore, but for those of us in other places or with access to bet at faraway places, a little shopping and teasers crossing the 3 and 7 at -120 or better still should be fairly widely available. We've got 8 fits on the week 9 board as it currently stands. Tennessee can be taken up to plus 8.5 at Pittsburgh, kicking off the week on Thursday night. And then bright and early Sunday morning, Miami can be taken up to plus 7.5 against Kansas City in Germany. Then we've got Cleveland available to come down to -2 hosting Arizona. Tampa Bay up to plus 8.5 at Houston. New Orleans down to -1.5 hosting Chicago. Carolina plus 8.5 hosting Indy. The Giants up to plus 7.5 at Las Vegas. And last but not least, Buffalo in a banger of a game on Sunday night, up to plus 8 at Cincinnati. Fortunately, as I look at this from a selfish standpoint, I don't see any road favorites that tempt me after the last 3 weeks have presented some cautionary tales, with San Francisco going down at Cleveland, Buffalo going down at New England, and Kansas City going down at Denver. I don't point this out to say that road favorites should never be part of your arsenal when it comes to teasers, but typically road favorites are the diciest proposition. There tends to be a bit more variance with those games, and with teasers, we're looking to reduce variance. And to that end, as I see 8 options on the board right now, applying a process of elimination to find the best games that reduce variance, I'm looking to wipe out games that are shaded toward the 3, if not already showing some -3s at sharper books. So Tennessee, Tampa Bay, and Carolina, going to set those options off to the side for now. And similarly, games with high totals tend to imply a little bit more variance. So Miami and Buffalo, going to put those options on the back burner. That leaves 3 remaining fits that I consider to be quite strong: Cleveland, New Orleans, and the Giants. And as far as the best bet goes for this week's teaser card, let's go with Cleveland -2 hosting Arizona, and pair the Browns with the Giants up to plus 7.5 at Las Vegas. When we're looking at Cleveland here, we're asking the superior team at home to do very little more than win outright. And the Cardinals might be getting just a slight bit of artificial inflation in the market size this week off of a misleading cover last week. There was the late touchdown, recovering an onside kick, and then kicking an otherwise meaningless field goal to get the backdoor cover against the Ravens. So the Cardinals' final score last week, not quite as kind to them as a lot of the game's true performance would have indicated. And then when we look at the Cardinals quarterback situation, they traded Joshua Dobbs to the Vikings yesterday, right before the trade deadline. And it's looking like Clayton Tune is going to be their starter this week in Cleveland. Today, during the open portion of practice, reporters were saying that Tune was passing to the team's active wide receivers alongside backup quarterback Jeff Driscoll. Kyler Murray still passing to practice squad players. So that's a pretty good indication of who we can expect to see under center for Arizona against the Browns. And even if it is Kyler Murray, I don't feel all that bullish on his first start back from a pretty severe injury against a stout Cleveland defense. In the second leg of the teaser for the Giants, it looks like Daniel Jones is going to be back under center, and it says something that's a pretty meaningful upgrade for this team. So more so than backing the Giants, I'm looking at this bet as a way to fade the Raiders, especially on a short week off of that pretty ugly Monday Night Football loss at the Lions. And I know the Raiders cleaned house not so long ago with a lot of their front office, their head coach, their offensive coordinator being shown the door. So it is possible that we get a bit of that classic dead cat bounce for the Raiders this week. I still just really struggle to see them winning by a margin in this one. Factor in that we've got a low total of 37 for that Giants-Raiders game. That really magnifies the relative value of each point we get in a 6-point teaser, taking the Giants up through that key number of 7. So again, best bet as far as teasers go this week, Cleveland -2 hosting Arizona, paired with the Giants plus 7.5 at Las Vegas. I will say, as a bit of a bonus here, I can see a strong case to be made for 3 and 4 team teasers at the right price. If we look at 3 team teasers, as long as you're getting plus 160 or better, I think there's a lot of value there. And I would throw New Orleans into the mix to go along with Cleveland and the Giants. The Saints offense, not built to win by margins, so I would be in no hurry to lay more than a touchdown with the Saints, even against a beleaguered Bears team. That said, I think it's a much more reasonable ask to take the Saints to do little more than win outright at home against Chicago. And as far as 4-team teasers go, the price point we're looking for there, plus 250 or better, I would like a team like Buffalo to go along with Cleveland, the Giants, and the Saints. And in that Sunday night matchup, I'm inclined to think the Bengals offense is back after a really strong showing last week in San Francisco off of a week 7 bye. But their defense has still regressed quite a bit in my book. So I see Bills-Bengals is more of a coin flip game, and there's a chance here with Buffalo to take a live dog up through a touchdown. One more note on teasers this week. want to be mindful of bankroll management, just be aware of your exposure on teams that you may be playing in multiple teasers to ensure that one bad result isn't going to ruin your entire week. For reference, if it's of any use, I'm planning to allocate 1.2 units toward Cleveland and the Giants, and the two-teamer with those guys will be my biggest bet. And then there will be less exposure on the Saints and the Bills. I know that lowers the ceiling with this week's teaser card, but I think that's well worth the trade-off of raising the floor and, again, being more resilient to the possibility of one bad outcome. All right, so we've talked sides, we've talked quite a bit of teasers, and I've got a prop in pocket this week as well. And this one, I consider it my way of taking the props and hops special to Germany, Miami, Kansas City, shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards. I like it up to minus 160, and I'm currently seeing minus 155 available at a pretty prominent offshore book. And for starters, this game presents the highest total on the week 9 board. It's really rare to see totals in the 50s these days. And more points, good for the prospects of more touchdowns. More touchdowns, good for the prospects of at least one 1-yard touchdown. I know a 1-yard touchdown sounds really specific, but it's a lot more common than a lot of fans would tend to think. We could see things like pass interference in the end zone, or just the field getting really compressed down near the goal line. A lot of snaps end up taking place inside the 2-yard line. And oftentimes, if the ball is even just inches inside the 2 and a touchdown is scored, I've seen that get graded as a 1-yard touchdown. So from a mathematical standpoint, I feel good about this one. And from a matchup standpoint, I feel pretty good about it as well. I think that both coaches here have a lot of creativity when it comes to their offenses presenting a threat near the goal line via the run or the pass. We could see some really fun play calls from Mike McDaniel or Andy Reid. So from a price standpoint, again, consider this good up to minus 160. I'm not seeing it everywhere. I don't think we will see it everywhere, but if you have a few books and can shop around, I think you should be able to find it. Now, I'll take a beat at this point of the show to share a weekly reminder that this season I'm partnering with Right Angle Sports in an affiliate capacity. And a big part of why I chose to do so is understanding the concept that betting is really fun, but winning can be really hard. And I think that my strongest value proposition with this show is highlighting the best information from the sharpest sources. And with its team of pro sports bettors, Right Angle Sports has built a reputation as the gold standard for picks. So they've got something to offer for everybody, from different price points with their NFL offerings to their college basketball flagship service with the college basketball season about to tip off. If you're interested in trying anything that Right Angle Sports has to offer, I would appreciate it if you could support Props and Hops along the way in doing so. I've built a custom link, tinyurl.com/RAS picks. And if you're with us via YouTube or in podcast form, that link is in the show notes. On Twitter, you can find that link in the bio. All right, we'll do a rapid fire rundown now of picks that we can consider the Props and Hops Week 9 portfolio. As far as sides go, looking at the Jets +3 hosting the Chargers, good up to minus 115. A trio of teasers, the best of which being that two-teamer at minus 120 or better, Cleveland -2 hosting Arizona, paired with the Giants +7.5 at the Raiders, and then a bit of a sprinkle on 3 and 4 teamers. That 3-teamer, we're looking for +160 or better, Cleveland, the Giants, as well as the Saints, -7.5 hosting Chicago. And then with that 4-teamer, we're looking for +250 or better, Cleveland, the Giants, the Saints, and Buffalo up to +8 in what could be a classic Sunday night matchup at Cincinnati. As far as props go this week, got one of those in pocket as well. Miami, Kansas City, shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards, currently seeing minus 155, and consider that one good up to minus 160. All right, with some picks taken care of, let's also weave in some process to this part of the show. And I'd like to use this segment to build on a really good conversation from last week's episode with Ron Marmolewski, where during the Malinsky Minute last week, we discussed the notion of the waiting is the hardest part, as a hat tip to not just Tom Petty for the classic song, but to David Malinsky for weaving that classic rock into the notion of how to wait results when it's a little bit ambiguous out as to how to most optimally do so. And I think the poster child for that right now in the NFL would be a unit like the Bengals offense. They were dominant last week at San Francisco. Burrow looked completely healthy off the bye. And I've heard a lot of people I respect say that Cincinnati's offense is fully back after their week 7 bye, and we can just dismiss whatever we saw with Burrow being hampered by injury in weeks 1 through 6. And then there's somebody whom I really respect, like Cleve TA, great handicapper. And when I shared something on this topic via Twitter, he responded and he was pushing back a bit. And he acknowledged the Bengals offense had a great game at San Francisco, but he needs to see it again before they're fully back in his book. And I can see that angle too. Absolutely. We don't want to make too much out of a 1-game sample size. Ultimately, I don't feel like I'm qualified to say who's right or wrong regarding any possible debate over the Bengals offense being fully back yet or not. I think that with sharp minds on both sides, it really illustrates the notion of the waiting being the hardest part. And it's just a fascinating handicap for this Bengals-Bills matchup. Bottom line for me, I think we can all agree that year-to-date results are particularly less meaningful for this Bengals offense, perhaps more so than any other unit across the NFL. So that is worth keeping in mind if you're looking at season-long stats. And selfishly, with a small bit of Buffalo teaser exposure in pocket, I'll just be rooting for a competitive game on Sunday night in Cincinnati. Last but not least, wow, we are flying through the show a bit, I guess, when it's a solo episode, and maybe I'm talking a bit fast. The episode length will be much more palatable if people are looking to get through this pretty quickly. Let's weave in the Malinsky Minute down the home stretch. And I think that with Dave at this time of year, I think of his fascination for food and beer pairings. When I hosted the House of Yards podcast with him during the 2017 football season, anytime I featured a beer of the week, Dave was really eager to try to throw out possible food pairings to go along with it. And I was especially thinking of that this past Saturday when I went with my wife, Mrs. Props and Hops, to Fluid State Beer Garden in Ventura, California, and had a really fun pairing with mushroom pizza and a hazy IPA. And at Fluid State, their mushroom pizza is called Fungus Among Us. It's all kinds of mushrooms stacked on top of basically a New York style pizza, big slice, thin crust, with the Fluid State twist being that they use a sourdough base for their crust. And the beer that I paired with this was called Reasonable Reasons, a hazy IPA clocking it at 6.3% ABV by Sante Adarius Rustic Ales out of Capitola, California, just south of the famous beach town Santa Cruz up in Northern California. And Reasonable Reasons has Strata, Citra, and Mosaic hops, giving it a really nice citrusy and tropical flavor. It also has a creamy mouthfeel with a dry finish that made this one dangerously smooth. And pairing that with the Fluid State pizza, the whole was definitely greater than the sum of its parts. We had a really nice savory sweet combo going on. Greasy pizza with the beer's dry finish kind of created like a self-cleansing ecosystem with each bite and sip that made you very eager to come back for more. So that was really enjoyable. And maybe I'm also thinking of Dave's food and beer pairings this week because I'll be in Vegas shortly and we can bet on a similarly good beer and food pairing this weekend in Dave's honor when I pay a visit to his favorite Las Vegas restaurant, Lotus of Siam. All right, we are rounding the corner down the home stretch here. A quick ask to those of you who are with us. If you're still tuned in, that's a great indicator that you're liking the show. On YouTube, if you could like this video, that would be greatly appreciated. Similarly, on Twitter, if you could like the post where this video lives, that would be appreciated. And in podcast form, I would love it if you could take 5 seconds to leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Last but not least, however you're listening, you can support the show by supporting Right Angle Sports. The custom link I've built out is tinyurl.com/raspicks. On YouTube and in podcast form, that link is in the show notes. And on Twitter, that link is in the bio. All right, this is going to go down as a heavy favorite to be the shortest episode of the NFL season. We will go ahead and wrap things up and make this episode shorter than 20 minutes. I do want to throw out one last note, thanking those of you for watching and listening to this episode. Enjoy week 9 in the NFL, and best of luck with your bets this weekend.